The alarm blared at 4:30 a.m., but Melissa Jenkins had been awake for hours already. Her 3-year-old daughter Emma had spiked a fever overnight, the third time this month. As the pale light of dawn crept through the blinds, Melissa's mind raced through her impossible arithmetic. The daycare wouldn't accept a sick child. Her mother couldn't babysit until 8 a.m. at the earliest, and her shift at Meridian Manufacturing started promptly at 6 a.m. Being late again would mean termination. The company's 3 strikes attendance policy had been made crystal clear during her last written warning. "Mommy, it hurts," Emma whimpered from her small bed, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. The child's forehead burned under Melissa's palm as she administered another dose of children's Tylenol. The digital clock on the nightstand seemed to accelerate, each minute evaporating faster than the last. This wasn't just about being late to punch a time card. This was about survival. At 32, Melissa had rebuilt her life from scratch after leaving an abusive relationship 2 years ago. Her job at Meridian, though demanding with its rigid schedules and modest pay, had been her lifeline, providing the health insurance Emma desperately needed for her chronic asthma and the steady income that kept their small apartment with its secondhand furniture and carefully budgeted groceries. By 5:40 a.m., Melissa had made 17 frantic calls, to neighbors, to distant relatives, to community services, each met with the same apologetic inability to help. When she finally carried her feverish daughter to the car, buckling her into the car seat with tears streaming down her face, she already knew she was choosing between her child's immediate needs and their long-term security. Some choices aren't really choices at all. "I'm sorry, sweetie," she whispered, kissing Emma's hot forehead. "Mommy will figure something out. I promise." The clock on her dashboard read 6:43 a.m. when she finally rushed through Meridian's employee entrance, her daughter half asleep against her shoulder. The security guard's sympathetic grimace told her everything she needed to know before she even reached her supervisor's office. "I understand the company policy, but my daughter," Melissa began, her voice breaking as she stood before the HR manager and her direct supervisor, the weight of Emma growing heavier in her arms. "Ms. Jenkins, this is your 4th tardiness this quarter," the HR manager interrupted, not unkindly but with the mechanical precision of someone following protocol. "The attendance policy is applied equally to all employees. I'm sorry, but we have to let you go, effective immediately." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Melissa struggled to process the words. Her chest tightened with the familiar panic of watching carefully constructed stability crumble. In that sterile office, with its motivational posters and corporate handbooks, the full weight of single parenthood in a system built for those with safety nets crashed down on her shoulders. What the HR manager couldn't see was the cascade of consequences already unfolding in Melissa's mind. The health insurance that would lapse at the end of the month, the rent that was due in 2 weeks, the resume she would need to update between nursing a sick child and searching for emergency assistance programs. She couldn't see the nights Melissa had stayed up calculating budgets to the penny, the meals she had skipped so Emma could eat better, the second-hand clothes she had carefully mended rather than replaced. "Is there any way, any accommodation at all?" Melissa attempted one last time, her voice barely above a whisper. "Policy is policy," her supervisor replied, sliding the termination paperwork across the desk. "We need reliability in our workforce." As Melissa gathered Emma's feverish body closer, preparing to leave with her final paycheck and a shattered sense of security, she couldn't have known that 5 floors above, in the executive suite, CEO Robert Keller was arriving early for a board meeting. She couldn't have known that the company's rigid attendance policy had been implemented during his predecessor's tenure, or that he himself had grown up with a single mother who had juggled similar impossible equations of care and livelihood. She couldn't have known that the tearful scene in the parking lot, a mother holding her sick child, standing beside a car with a missing hubcap and a check engine light that had been on for weeks, would catch the CEO's attention as he pulled into his reserved parking space in his luxury sedan. What happened next would not only change Melissa's life but would spark a company-wide conversation about the true meaning of workforce reliability, the value of employee retention, and the human cost of inflexible workplace policies. Because sometimes, the most reliable employees aren't those who never face crises. They're those who navigate impossible situations with determination and grace, day after day after day. As Emma coughed weakly against her shoulder, Melissa fumbled for her car keys, unaware that her story was about to take an unexpected turn when the CEO himself approached her car window. "Excuse me," a deep voice called out as Melissa fumbled with her keys, tears blurring her vision. She turned to see a tall man in an expensive suit approaching her car. His brow furrowed as he noticed Emma's flushed face pressed against her shoulder. "I'm Robert Keller, Meridian's CEO," he said, extending his hand before quickly withdrawing it, noticing her full arms. "Is everything all right?" Melissa straightened her posture instinctively, attempting to salvage some dignity despite the mascara tracks on her cheeks. "I've just been terminated, sir. My daughter was sick, and I couldn't—" Her voice cracked as Emma whimpered against her neck. Robert's expression shifted, something unreadable crossing his features. "Let me help you get her settled," he offered, opening the car door. As Melissa secured Emma in her car seat, Robert stood quietly, observing the worn upholstery, the carefully organized emergency supplies in the back seat. Evidence of a parent who prepared for every contingency except losing her job. "Ms. Jenkins, right?" he asked, checking a hunch. When she nodded, he continued, "Would you mind waiting here for a moment? I'd like to make a call." 20 minutes later, Melissa found herself in the executive conference room, Emma sleeping on a makeshift bed of suit jackets donated by concerned board members. The contrast was jarring. The mahogany table where million-dollar decisions were made now served as a sick bay for a 3-year-old, while her mother sat stunned as Robert Keller questioned the HR director about the termination. "So let me understand this correctly," Robert said, his voice measured but intent. "One of our employees with a consistent 3-year work history, who has received performance commendations twice, has been terminated because she arrived 43 minutes late while caring for her sick child?" The HR director shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, the attendance policy is quite clear. 3 strikes and we lose valuable employees," Robert finished, sliding Melissa's personnel file across the table. "Tell me, what's the cost of recruiting and training a replacement? What's the cost to morale when other employees, many who are parents themselves, see how we treat dedicated workers in crisis?" The room fell silent as the executive team exchanged glances. The CFO cleared his throat. "Approximately $4,200 to replace an employee at Ms. Jenkins' level, not counting productivity losses during transition. And what was the cost of allowing her a grace period this morning, or implementing a flexible schedule policy?" Robert continued, warming to his subject. "Because from where I stand, we've just demonstrated to our entire workforce that Meridian values rigid adherence to policy over basic human compassion." The HR director's defense grew weaker. "The policy exists to ensure operational consistency. If we make exceptions, we acknowledge reality," Robert interrupted. "The reality that our employees are human beings with lives and responsibilities outside these walls. My mother raised me alone while working 2 jobs. She was the most reliable, hardworking person I've ever known. But there were days when life made it impossible for her to be everywhere at once." As the executive team debated, Melissa sat silently, witnessing the collision of corporate policy and human experience. She thought of her coworkers, single father Darren who traded shifts to attend his son's baseball games, Maria who cared for her elderly mother between shifts, young parents working opposite schedules to avoid childcare costs, all of them walking tightropes, all one emergency away from falling. The realization spreading across the executives' faces revealed an uncomfortable truth. Their universal policies had always disproportionately affected their most vulnerable employees. Those with wealth could hire backup childcare. Those with partners could tag team emergencies. Those with family nearby had safety nets. Meridian's policies had been designed as though everyone started from equal footing, ignoring the reality that some employees began each day having already climbed mountains before even arriving at work. "Our turnover rate in the production department is 22% higher than industry average," the HR director finally admitted, consulting her tablet. "Exit interviews consistently cite inflexible scheduling as a primary factor." Robert nodded, his suspicions confirmed. "So we're actively driving away talent while congratulating ourselves on maintaining standards." He glanced at Melissa, who was gently stroking Emma's hair. Standards that punish dedication and reward privilege. The meeting continued as Emma slept, the fever breaking under the combination of medicine and rest. Outside the glass walls of the conference room, curious employees gathered, whispering about the unprecedented scene. A factory worker and her child in the executive suite, the CEO himself pacing as he challenged years of established protocol. By lunchtime, word had spread throughout the facility. Production workers gathered in small groups, sharing their own stories of impossible choices between family obligations and job security. For the first time, many felt seen, their daily juggling acts acknowledged by leadership that had previously seemed distant and detached. In the conference room, Robert made a decision. Ms. Jenkins will be reinstated immediately, with today as a paid sick day, he announced. But this isn't just about one employee. We're forming a task force to review all attendance and scheduling policies, with representatives from every department and level. He turned to Melissa, his expression solemn. I apologize for what happened today. Meridian failed you, and I suspect we've been failing many others. Would you be willing to serve on this task force? Your perspective would be invaluable. As Melissa nodded, stunned by the rapid reversal of her circumstances, she couldn't help but think of her co-workers. How many had been fired before her for similar reasons? How many had silently endured impossible situations, choosing between their children's needs and their livelihoods? What began as one mother's crisis was evolving into something larger. A moment of reckoning for a company culture that had confused rigidity with reliability, punctuality with productivity. As Emma stirred awake, her fever noticeably reduced, Melissa realized that her most vulnerable moment had somehow become a catalyst for change. The story of her termination and reinstatement spread quickly through Meridian's ranks. For employees who had long suffered silently under inflexible policies, it represented something they hadn't felt in years. Hope that perhaps the system could bend without breaking, that humanity might finally factor into the corporate equation. The following Monday morning, Melissa arrived at Meridian 15 minutes early, Emma safely recovered and back at daycare. As she walked through the employee entrance, she noticed something different. Colleagues nodded with newfound respect, supervisors greeted her by name, and pinned to the bulletin board was a company-wide announcement about the newly formed Workplace Flexibility Task Force. But the most surprising change awaited in the parking lot after her shift. Ms. Jenkins, Robert Keller called, approaching with keys in hand. Do you have a moment? She followed him to where his car was parked. I realized something after our meeting last week, he explained. Policy changes take time, but immediate problems need immediate solutions. I'd like to offer you a ride to work until we implement proper supports. Melissa's protest died on her lips as he continued. My mother worked at a factory across town. Her supervisor drove her to work for 6 months when our car broke down. 20 years later, I haven't forgotten that kindness. The next morning began a routine that would soon become legendary throughout Meridian manufacturing. The CEO's luxury sedan would pull up outside Melissa's apartment building precisely at 5:30 a.m. For 30 minutes each day, as they drove through the awakening city, the single mother and the executive discussed the practical realities of workplace policies. Conversations that would reshape Meridian from the inside out. The problem isn't just scheduling, Melissa explained one morning. It's the disconnect between policymakers and those affected by the policies. Maria in assembly has been working split shifts for 3 years to care for her mother with dementia. Darren in shipping negotiates shift trades every week for his son's therapy appointments. Robert listened intently, his perspective expanding with each conversation. We've been operating as though work exists in isolation from life, he admitted. That's never been true for most people. By the 3rd week of these morning commutes, the task force had compiled enough data to present preliminary findings at the executive meeting. The numbers told a compelling story. Departments with flexible scheduling options showed 18% higher retention rates, 12% fewer quality control issues, and significantly higher employee satisfaction scores. The human stories behind these statistics proved even more powerful. The task force had gathered testimonials from dozens of employees describing the impossible choices they faced between work obligations and family responsibilities. Parents of children with special needs, caregivers for elderly relatives, employees managing chronic illnesses, all describe the constant anxiety of navigating rigid workplace requirements against unpredictable life demands. What we've discovered, Robert announced to the board, is that inflexibility isn't just inhumane, it's bad business. We're losing our most dedicated employees because our policies punish circumstances beyond their control. The transformation began with pilot programs, flexible start times within a 2-hour window, a shift-swapping app that allowed employees to trade hours without supervisor approval, emergency childcare services, and remote work options for certain positions. Most radically, Meridian implemented compassion days. No questions asked paid time off for family emergencies that wouldn't count against regular sick leave. As word spread about Meridian's policy innovations, something unexpected happened. Applications for open positions doubled. Local news outlets picked up the story of the CEO who drove an employee to work. Business journals requested interviews about Meridian's compassionate capitalism approach. 6 months after her near termination, Melissa found herself presenting alongside Robert at a manufacturing industry conference, explaining how flexibility initiatives had decreased Meridian's turnover rate by 34% while increasing productivity. The old approach assumed that reliability meant rigid conformity, she told the audience of executives and HR professionals. Our experience proves the opposite. When you support employees through life's challenges, they bring their full focus and loyalty to work. The morning drives continued even as Meridian's policies evolved. The company eventually purchased a fleet of vanpool vehicles for employees with transportation challenges. A vacant office space was converted into an emergency childcare center. Shift schedules became adaptable within production requirements. 1 year to the day after Melissa had stood crying in the parking lot, Robert picked her up as usual. This time, Emma hopped into the back seat, excited to attend the ribbon cutting for the Meridian Family Center, the on-site childcare and elder care facility that would serve as the cornerstone of the company's work-life integration program. "Did you ever imagine this?" Melissa asked as they pulled into the now-familiar parking lot, where employees gathered around the new facility. Robert smiled, thinking of his own mother. "No, but I should have. The solution was always there. We just needed someone brave enough to show us the problem." As Emma raced ahead to join the other children, Melissa paused before following. The journey from terminated employee to workplace policy consultant had been unexpected, but the principle that guided it was simple. When workplaces acknowledge the full humanity of their employees, everyone benefits. The transformation at Meridian Manufacturing became a case study in business schools and a model for companies nationwide. What began as one mother's impossible morning had catalyzed a movement reimagining the relationship between employers and employees. "You know," Robert said as they walked toward the gathering crowd, "most business innovations come from solving real problems. We were trying to force humans to adapt to inhuman systems. All we needed was the courage to build systems that serve humans instead." Melissa nodded, watching as employees entered the building with lighter steps and unburdened shoulders. The most profound change wasn't visible in productivity reports or retention statistics. It was written on the faces of workers who no longer had to choose between being good parents and good employees. The CEO who drove a single mother to work had done more than save one job. He had started a revolution of compassion in corporate America, proving that the strongest businesses are those that recognize the strength it takes for their employees to show up each day, against all odds. As Emma ran back to grab her hand, Melissa realized that the most important lesson wasn't about policies or programs. It was about the power of seeing people as complete human beings, with responsibilities and challenges that extend beyond workplace walls. In acknowledging that truth, Meridian hadn't just saved jobs, they had transformed lives.